I realized and thought about it 95% probably of my past deals that I've had, the buyer only had one time to look at that home before they had to make a decision on whether or not they wanted to purchase. That wasn't a requirement. That's usually the way that things work out, especially when you're in a competitive market. You may not have time to go see that house multiple times. You may have one opportunity to see it, and then you have to make that decision. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. This week's episode, we're going to be going through a checklist of things that you will want to remember when you're touring or viewing homes of interest. All right, when you're out there doing what they do in the House Hunters episodes, right? When you're actually looking at houses, that's one of the more fun parts of a real estate transaction. You know, once you're actually in the deal and you're filling out paperwork and applying for mortgages and all that stuff, that's the part that everybody hates. It's the tedious stuff that you have to go through. But when you actually get to search for those homes, that's one thing that people love. They love looking at properties. People think that that's a lot of what realtors do, or that's all that we do, and there's a lot more that goes into it. But the process of looking at the homes, you don't want the fun and the excitement of it to cause you to be distracted or overlook important things that can very well cause problems or issues down the road. And so you want to make sure when you're touring or viewing that home that you are doing everything you can to learn all that is possible about that property. You know, when I was preparing for this episode and thinking about things that I want to remind people that they need to take into consideration whenever they're touring homes, I realized and thought about it 95% probably of my past deals that I've had, the buyer only had one time to look at that home before they had to make a decision on whether or not they wanted to purchase. That wasn't a requirement. That's usually the way that things work out, especially when you're in a competitive market. You may not have time to go see that house multiple times. You may have one opportunity to see it, and then you have to make that decision. Now, fortunately, the market isn't as crazy as it was back in 21 and 22 when you had people in different states who had never set foot inside the house trying to make an offer. But there is still very much a possibility that you will only see or be inside of that home one time before you make the decision to actually go under contract. Now, there's still a lot of things that you have to do at that point, but you have to put money and time and effort and all these other things up front to have the opportunity to purchase that home. And so you're having to make a split second decision in some cases on whether or not you want to actually go through with this purchase or pursue this home. That's a big deal. You know, I think of the TV show, Married at First Sight, right? You're essentially saying like, hey, do I want to get engaged to this person, or I want to get married to this house right out of the gate, not knowing anything really about it until just now? Like, there's some times where the house just hit the market. We haven't had time to do our due diligence or do our research beforehand, and you're seeing everything and processing all of that in real time. And so you have to ask yourself, are you ready to make that big of a decision on a house in that one? And so I'm going to talk about things that you can do to try to offset some of that risk, to try to learn as much as you possibly can about that home, so that although you may be making the decision with not as much information as you would prefer, you can be in the best position possible to make that choice, and so that you can sleep peacefully, that you're not going to get cold feet after the fact, and that you're going to feel confident with that decision moving forward. And so we're just going to go through the checklist of things that I tell people when I'm working with buyers. Here's what you want to keep in mind. Here's how you want to prepare for just the actual act of viewing and touring houses. It's a much different mindset than when you're just out and about having a fun Saturday afternoon going looking at open houses, right? The way you look at those homes when you're just having fun and just being nosy and just seeing what the neighbor's house looks like, that is a completely different mindset from when you're actually looking at a home that you want to purchase. And so we're going to talk about all the things you should do leading up to that and even after or while you're actually in the home. one of the first things that people often wonder is, okay, well, how long does this process typically take? How long are you typically showing homes to a buyer before they go under contract, before they make a decision? What does that timeline typically look like? Of course, it's different for everyone, right? I have people who have looked for months and months and months. I have people who have literally called me the day of, that the day they found something, we went and looked at it and they made an offer and went under contract that same day, right? It's all over the place in how long a person is typically looking. But on average, I would say a lot of buyers that I work with, they're usually looking for houses and making offers, legitimate offers on properties for about a month, right? It's usually about a good month or so. They might look at anywhere from about 8 to 10 houses or so that they're considering or taking into consideration and researching and seeing if it's something that they like, right? So on average, it's about a month, usually around 8 to 10 houses before they finally land one that they like. That's the average. And again, it could change depending on your situation and stuff too. But I always tell people as well, if we get into the process, we get into the thick of things, and we start looking at homes and start touring properties, and let's say we've looked at 12 houses and none of those houses are even remotely a match to what you want. If we've looked at that many houses and you're still not finding anything that even remotely piques your interest or that entices you enough to want to move forward on it, that lets me know that there's likely something wrong with our search, right? There's something with the parameters. There's something going on that we're not catching beforehand, right? If you've looked at 10 houses and you haven't seen anything you liked, there's something wrong. Maybe you have unrealistic expectations, or maybe there's something that needs to be tweaked on the search that we're setting up to kind of catch this issue. But there is no such thing, and I've said this before in past episodes, I'll say it again, there's no such thing as a perfect house. Right. There's no home that is going to check off every box you could possibly want to have checked off. And even if there is a house out there that seemingly does look perfect, right? It checks off all your boxes and then, hey, this is perfect for us, Derek. Live there for a couple years and I guarantee you won't feel that same way. Right. So I always tell people, do not go out there looking for the perfect house. Do not go out there looking for the house that checks off all the boxes. Again, you want to go back to that 80-10-10 rule we talked about. Remember, you want a house that has 80% of the things that you want, 10% of the things that you can change, and 10% of the things that you can just learn to live with, right? That yard may not be as big as you want. That laundry room may not be the size that you would prefer, but you can learn to live with it. But the important thing that you understand is you go into it with the mindset that I'm not going to find something that matches everything on my list. I just want the majority of the stuff that I can, and we'll see where we can go from there. And so again, if you find yourself in the process, if you've been looking at 30 houses over the course of 6 months and haven't seen anything that you liked enough to make an offer on, something's wrong with your search. Right, because the house that you're looking for is too much of a unicorn for you to actually find what is going to make you happy in the end. And so just keep that in mind when you're going through the process and trying to figure out, okay, how often or how long should I be looking before certain things start to stand out to me for what I want. The next thing you want to keep in mind is that once you have kind of the area or the type of houses that you want locked down in your search, you also want to make sure that you're doing an adequate amount of research before you even set foot in that home. Granted, again, I'm realistic. There are times where, a house just hit the market. You have time to go look at it today. You may not have time to do extensive research on the property, but if at all possible, even if you just have one evening or one day before you go see it, it's always better if you have some time to actually sit down and do some research on the home, and even better if your realtor has time as well to be able to go and do some in-depth research. We have access to some resources that you may not have available, so it's always best to see if you can give them time as well to kind of go through, do their research, figure out like what the valuation is looking like. It's always better if we can do that beforehand. There's a few different resources that you can use to try to get a better idea of that home or that property. Obviously, first and foremost, the listing that is posted online. Usually if it's sent to an MLS, that is usually distributed to all the other third-party sites out there, the Zillows, the Realtor.coms, whatever platform or program you're using to look at that home, that is where the majority of you are going to first see that house or see that option pop up. And when you see those photos, you need to keep in mind that real estate or listing photos are a lot like dating profiles, right? It's like the dating apps. They're not designed or they're not set up or orchestrated for you to have a realistic depiction of how that home actually looks. They're just designed to entice you or grab your attention enough to get you to schedule a showing, right? When we go to list a home, we know the more showings it has, the higher the likelihood that it's going to sell quickly and for the highest price possible. And so everything that we're doing with that marketing, the staging, the photos, the lighting, everything we're doing is designed to getting the most amount of people possible to come and check out that house. And so if it has warts, we should say, in the home, like let's say the driveway is really steep, or let's say there's something wrong with the design of the inside of the home, we're not going to point that out of the photos if we can avoid it, right? We're not going to try to be misleading, but we're also going to make sure that we highlight the best parts of that home and not anything else that's going on. And so you want to make sure that although the photos are a great way to you to get a look at the house or get a feel of how it looks, don't look at those as giving you a realistic depiction of how that home looks, right? The photos are just to grab your attention. They're not going to give you a realistic depiction of how that home likely looks. So first you want to look at the photos just to get a general idea. A lot of times realtors will also have a person come in and provide a floor plan or measurements for the home as well. So again, you want to look at that and see, okay, I may not have been able to tell by the photos, but I can see in this floor plan, this wall is segmented, or hey, this is the size of the rooms. That room is smaller than what I have right now. That may not work for me. So you can use that as a way to determine whether or not that's the best process for you. Floor plans aren't always available online to the general public. And so again, check with your realtor if you're not seeing it show up in there. The next thing I would look for is a virtual tour. There are a lot of listings out there where we will hire our photographer to do a virtual tour of the home. And that is where you can literally go and get a virtual screenshot room by room of how that entire house looks. Now, that's a great way to get around maybe seeing the things inside the home that would have turned you off that didn't show up in the photos, right? Because with you have the virtual tour, you can go inside each room, look up, look down, look all around and see like there's a massive stain on the carpet in the corner. You can see all those things that you likely wouldn't have seen with photos. You can usually see them in a virtual tour. Again, not every realtor does that for every listing, but that's definitely one of the things that I would recommend you check to see if it is available and use that feature. Don't just trust the pictures. Use that virtual tour, and that's going to give you a great idea before you ever even set foot or waste time looking at a house that isn't going to fit what you are looking for. Another thing that I would reference as well is that because most houses are usually sold by realtors and sold using the local MLS, if it's an older home, or if it's like a resale home or a home that is had multiple owners, I would also ask your realtor to see if there's an old MLS listing that they would be able to share with you as well. That usually gives you an idea of, hey, we're trying to figure out if this current owner made any changes, made any updates to the home. The old photos could be a great way for you to get an idea of like what all has changed, right? There could be a ton of updates and then you realize, oh, this current owner didn't do those. Those had already been there. Or they may have had other issues or problems or things that they had showing up in previous listings that you wouldn't know about unless you saw this current one. And so check to see if they have an old listing. I would also recommend checking the tax records. Now, depending on how big or advanced technologically your county is, they will likely have a tax record site where you can go to look up information and tax records on that property, right? So you can look up when it was bought, when it was sold, who the owners are. You can see, was it a LLC or maybe someone else who owned it that was renting it out. You can see all of that in there. And then there are some sites. So in Wake County, which is one of the bigger counties where I live, we have a site that has a mapping feature where you can use that to go and see if it's in a flood zone. You can see any easements that are showing up on the maps for that area. Not every county has features like that, but if your county does, absolutely use one of those items to help you get a better feel for that particular property. And then the other thing that I reference as well, using beforehand, is Google Earth and Google Maps, right? Look up that house and Google it and see, okay, Is it issues with the lot? Does it back up to a major road? Is it a steep driveway? You can see all those things if you use the Google Streets map. Now, if it's newer construction, they may not have all of those on there, but again, you're using every resource at your disposal to try to get an idea of this house before you actually view it in person. And then last point on research is just a straight up Google. Right? You want to find out, like, hey, was there anything weird that happened with this particular house? Right? Was it, did it used to have illegal activity taking place here? Was there a crime that took place? Anything that went down at that home that might show up in a Google search? You would like to know that before you buy that home, right? There's sometimes where that stuff may have happened and the agent or the sellers don't even know it happened in the home. But again, if you were to Google it, that would help save you time. If that's something you're not comfortable with, you want to be able to go ahead and look that up ahead of time. And so using all those resources are a great way to kind of learn more about the home before you ever even get there. Next up comes the scheduling process, right? So usually, more times than not, if you're working with a realtor, which is going to make your job a ton easier as far as like just viewing houses, you'll reach out to your realtor and see if you about scheduling a time to view the home. Assuming it is in their local MLS, more times than not, they can just easily schedule a viewing of that home and go and show you and tour that property for you. The only time that gets really tricky is if it's, let's say, an off-market sale or it's a for sale by owner. And even then, I've done showings for those type of houses as well. We just usually have to work directly with the seller as far as getting into that house and viewing that home. But that is one of the easiest way to kind of go through that process. So you just call up your realtor, schedule that showing. If at all possible, try to see if you can get a day or two of time where you guys can all sit down and just research before you actually go and tour the home. But that's going to be one of the easiest ways to do that. If you do an open house, or if they're doing an open house, that's another way that you can view the home as well. But keep in mind, when you go to tour an open house, the agent who is hosting that open house, anytime an agent is showing a home to a buyer, that agent has to represent someone, right? And so if you're at an open house and that agent, obviously, if you just met them, they obviously don't represent you, which means that they by default represent the seller. And so when you go tour those open houses or tour those properties, just let them know that you already have a realtor, but don't go in there sharing confidential information about your home search. Don't go in sharing information that could hurt your bargaining power. Don't let them know when your lease is ending, or you have to be moved out by this date, or how much you need your current house to sell for. Don't tell them any of that stuff. They don't need to know. They are representing the seller in that instance, right? And so you want to make sure that you keep all of that information between you and your realtor representative. And that's one thing to keep in mind when you're going to tour open house. But that's a few of the main ways to actually schedule them. Now, when you actually get to the showing and you're actually touring the home, again, you want to make sure that you are not distracted by the fun of the showing, right? You don't want to get kind of thrown off by all the pretty objects and all those things as well. That house is being marketed to sell. And so while you know that it has likely a lot of decorations, it likely looks neat, it likely has staging and all these other things, you need to make sure that you look over every area of that house, not just the inside, but also around the home as well. And so when you're going and touring inside of that home, you need to be looking for signs of things that could be wrong, right? You're looking at the flooring, you're looking at the windows, you're looking to see just the general layout or the upkeep of the home. That can tell you a lot, right? I've been to houses where they didn't have hardly any updates, no cosmetic changes or upgrades really, but it was incredibly and abundantly clear that seller took meticulous care of that home, right? They cleaned everything. They had all their appliances regularly maintenance. They had all those things taken care of. And that spoke highly of the home, right? Because then we know, okay, yes, it may not have the fresh paint. It may not have the new trendy colors or appliances, but we know that all the important things have been taken care of. And so that, again, gives that buyer peace of mind in knowing, hey, I can buy a new refrigerator. I can get some new paint up on the walls, but I would not want to have to deal with the crawl space being fully encapsulated. I would not have to deal with the HVAC breaking down any day. I don't have to worry about those bigger items because those have already been taken care of. And so you're looking to see like, hey, what kind of care in maintaining this home has that current owner done? And that will help you determine, hey, I likely we're going to have some issues when it comes time for the inspection if I realize that they don't really do a good job of taking care of this house, right? And so you're looking all through the home to see if there's anything wrong. A lot of times, depending on the state, they will usually have property disclosure. So in North Carolina, we have a property disclosure, which is the seller's opportunity to point out, the age of the HVAC, the age of the roof, if there's any problems with plumbing or leaks or anything like that. And so although we don't have pre-home inspections in a lot of cases out here, we do at least have disclosures. Now, again, those disclosures aren't a catch-all. There's still a lot of things that could be missed, but the important thing is that it at least gives you a general idea of that home's condition if that seller is willing to share that information, right? And so we're looking at those disclosures as well to see what type of things we need to look at. And then last but not least, your realtor. If you're not using a realtor in the purchase of a home, I highly recommend that you get one because the realtor's experience in these deals and in these transactions is going to prove invaluable, right? We have looked through hundreds, if not thousands of homes. We are not distracted by the pretty colors and the appliances and all that stuff. We know the things to look for. We've been in transactions where we've seen the inspection reports point out things that the average buyer would typically miss. And so we're looking for those things when we're actually touring the home, right? We're looking in the crawl space. We're looking up there at the ceiling. We're looking for signs or evidence of anything that could be wrong and letting you know as well, hey, these are things you want to keep in mind. Hey, I know the house looks great. That's awesome. Keep in mind, there's no shades on any of the windows, so that's going to be an expense when you guys close on this house. There's no refrigerator. That's going to be an expense as well. There's maybe some flooring or something that hasn't been taken care of. That's another expense. So like the realtor can help point out those things that you may not have considered or may not have taken into account when you're going through the process of looking in that home. Family members and friends are great, but again, they only know the houses that they've been in. Realtors, we go in houses for a living. And so we have seen a little bit of everything, right? We can give you that insight and that knowledge when you're going to tour that home. And that's going to be the best resource possible for you to use and to make sure that when you make that decision on whether or not you want to move forward with that home or put a ring on it in that case, you have the knowledge and the experience. You've done as much research as you possibly can beforehand, and that makes it much less likely that you're going to run into surprises down the road. Because again, you likely are only going to get one time inside that house. And so if you only get that one shot, you want to make sure that you've done your homework and that you make sure that you give it the attention and the time that it deserves. A house can be a tremendous blessing for you. It's one of the best things that I believe for any person is just as far as creating a life for yourself, for your household, helping your financial situation. A house can be a tremendous advantage to a lot of people if it is done the right way. It can also be a curse in many cases if you do it the wrong way or if you rush into a decision. And so again, you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to not only learn all you can before you go into the deal, but even while you're touring that home, that you're really studying and figuring out if that house is the right place for you. So keep those things in mind. If you ever have any questions, I'm always here to answer them. But hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next time.